I know AI has been a central topic of my channel these last few days and weeks, but it's really important to highlight just what a domino effect and ripple effect AI is having on this hobby that we love so much. And it is now having an impact on the Steam machine, the upcoming hardware from Valve that is basically meant to be like a consoleized version of a PC that is more accessible to the masses and something that is just really intuitive where you don't have to deal with like Windows and all of the friction that causes with gaming. And it's something that a lot of people are looking forward to, but with artificial intelligence kind of hoarding so many of the PC components that make these kinds of new hardware possible, it's putting companies like Valve and hardware manufacturers in a difficult position. Now, I've been wondering for a while whether we're going to get an update on the Steam machine. After all, it was advertised to be launching sometime in early 2026, and we've heard nothing since, and that likely has in large part to do with Valve having to consider what the price of the Steam machine and its other upcoming hardware, like the Steam controller and the Steam Frame VR headset, will sit at based on what the market is looking like for, computing components that are being hoarded up by AI companies and therefore causing massive inflation and a lot of shortage. Well, we finally got an update on February 4th, 2026 via the following blog post titled Steam Hardware, Launch Timing, and Other FAQs. I wish I could tell you the news was good, but what we're basically seeing in this blog post is that while there has been no official release date for the Steam machine, internally they likely had some plans that have since been shifted as a result of the memory shortage that has basically caused an internal delay, and they kind of confirm as much with the wording of this statement. Scrolling down, you'll find the following segment that reads, "When will these be launching and how much will they cost?" Well, here's what they had to say on that front. "When we announced these products in November, we planned on being able to share specific pricing and launch dates by now. So if it wasn't for the DRAM shortage and inflation, Valve would have already settled on a price for the Steam machine and would have announced a launch date already, but they're just not able to do that because things are fluctuating so much." The statement continues, "But the memory and storage shortages you've likely heard about across the industry have rapidly increased since then. The limited availability and growing prices of these critical components mean we must revisit our exact shipping schedule and pricing, especially around Steam Machine and Steam Frame. Their ultimate goal, though, is to ship all three products in the first half of the year, and that has not changed. But we have work to do to land on concrete pricing and launch dates that we can confidently announce, being mindful of how quickly the circumstances around both of those things can change. We'll keep you updated as much as we can as we finalize those plans as soon as possible." So basically, Valve is waiting for the computing components market to stabilize enough where they can confidently say that at this price point, we're going to be able to weather out the storm. And it'll be like at a price point where it makes sense for where the market's at for things like memory. The uncertainty surrounding the electronics market as a result of AI causing all of this has ultimately made Valve not know, like even at this stage, what the price will be. And the end result is that until that decision is settled, like such a pivotal decision for this business move, they cannot announce when this thing's gonna release. They just have to wait until the market chills out enough where they can feel like somewhat confident in knowing the trajectory of the market, that they can price things in a way that makes sense for where the market's currently at. So I would say that with the Steam machine, pricing's kind of been the big topic of conversation. So much of the Steam machine's success is riding on its price. And, already Steam and Valve have said full on that they're not going to subsidize the Steam machine. A lot of other console manufacturers like PlayStation and Nintendo and whatnot, they're able to sell their consoles at a cheaper price point because the main business is in adoption of that hardware so that they can sell software and they can, release exclusives that makes them all the money. But with the Steam machine not being this like console, right, in a traditional sense that has exclusives and all these things, ultimately it's still a PC. For Steam and Valve, it didn't make sense to subsidize this. So it's going to be probably like a little higher price than traditional consoles. And it's probably going to try to be competitive with PCs that are similarly spec'd. But it's not going to be like this machine that's going to be priced to a level that you would see consoles fear. So already the general prediction was like $700 to $800 would be the price point of the Steam Machine before the RAM shortage and inflation happened. But now with RAM and storage, even like components like CPUs and whatnot going up in price, like, I don't know, I'm a little afraid to see what the price point is for this thing when Steam and Valve feel ready to announce it. I think anything past $800 and the Steam Machine becomes a lot less coveted for your average consumer. It'll become an enthusiast machine at $800. A lot of people are saying that this thing should be $500, and I agree that if this thing were $500, it would sell like hotcakes and would sell massively well, and it would be competitive with consoles. But for this to be a profitable venture for Valve, they have to sell the Steam Machine at a decent enough gain. They can't sell these things at a loss. And now with all these components getting more expensive and us not knowing yet whether Valve has a war chest of RAM and memory and storage and all these things that will allow them to weather this storm in the way that PlayStation has recently announced that they feel confident that they can hold out longer at the current price points without increasing prices too much due to the RAM inflation and all these things. Everything surrounding the pricing of the Steam Machine is up in the air. All I'll say is that it's more likely that the Steam Machine will be I want to say $800 to even $1,000, especially for the 2 terabyte version, rather than the desired $500 to $800 range. And, one of the nice things about the Steam Machine was that it'd be upgradable. Specifically, the SSD and RAM would be upgradable and accessible for this device. But with the prices of these components now shooting up to a degree that is no longer affordable for the masses, this upgradability, it almost loses its value. And that's not Valve or Steam's fault. It's just the nature of the market that AI has put us into. And more specifically, this is the direct result of OpenAI's business maneuvers, namely the first domino that kickstarted all of this being when OpenAI made a deal with both SK Hynix and Samsung without telling Samsung or SK Hynix that OpenAI was making a deal with the other company of basically acquiring roughly 40% of the world's RAM, basically. A mass acquisition of RAM that caused a mass panic across other AI companies who also had a secure RAM before all of it would get gobbled up. And it just created this panic where, RAM was in such short supply because of how much OpenAI had gobbled up that everyone felt the need to accrue as much RAM as possible to weather out the storm of the market being completely fucked by that one move by OpenAI that caused this chain of events that has now led to SSDs going up in price significantly, to RAM going up in price significantly. In fact, that was the first thing that was affected that then trickled into everything else. GPUs are now going up in price significantly. NVIDIA is now supporting OpenAI and putting all their efforts into focusing on providing chips for OpenAI, and the consumer side of things has fallen by the wayside, which is why they've just recently announced, I reported this in my last video, that NVIDIA is essentially cutting a lot of GPU production in 2026. And that means on the NVIDIA front, GPU prices are about to shoot up due to low supply and high demand. AMD is also making deals with OpenAI, and they are likely also to increase prices at some point. And AMD is the partner that Valve are going with for the Steam Machine. So, that aspect of things is still fluctuating. So yeah, if you want to blame one company for all this going on with the Steam Machine where the price is uncertain, the launch date is uncertain, even at this stage of 2026, blame it all on OpenAI and the move that caused a ripple effect and a chain reaction. Now, another entity who spoke out recently was none other than the CEO of AMD, who was asked during an earnings call about the Steam Machine and what prospects look like for it. And basically, Tom's Hardware reports here that commenting on the state of its business during the company's Q4 2025 earnings call on February 3rd, 2026, AMD CEO Dr. Lisa Su seemingly confirmed the release of Valve's new mini PC over the coming months with a suggestion that the Steam Machine is on track to begin shipping early this year, specifically saying that from a product standpoint, Valve is on track to begin shipping its AMD-powered Steam Machine early this year. But that messaging contrasts Valve and Steam's messaging a little bit, because what they're saying is things are still uncertain, and they've committed to launching the Steam Machine before the first half of 2026 is over, but not necessarily by early 2026. It all depends on the market and, whether it stabilizes or not, or whether it continues to fluctuate. If it continues to fluctuate, then Valve and Steam will be forced to continue tracking how things go on that front before they sell on a price point. And when the Steam Machine's price is finally announced and it's higher than you would have liked, just remember that it's likely a little more expensive due to Valve and Steam reacting to the market conditions caused by OpenAI. So if you don't like how the Steam Machine ultimately ends up being priced, if it ends up being more expensive than you anticipated, some of that blame you can likely shift to OpenAI as the source, the originators of the current state of computing components and how fucked that market is. This is just such a highly anticipated device and one that could very well disrupt a couple markets, but given the current market conditions, it just sucks to see this device with so much potential trapped in this space thanks to OpenAI. But at the very least, Valve did decide to communicate and assure people that they're still working on it and, updating people in how and why things are happening the way they are, why there's been a delay when it comes to announcing price and launch date, and assuring people that they're still thinking about things, keeping track of the situation and contemplating how they're going to move forward. It's good to hear, but it still sucks that these are the circumstances that we have to deal with. It sucks to know that by now we would have gotten a price and a release date for the Steam Machine, and it probably would have launched sooner had it not been for, the AI and specifically OpenAI's disruption. So if you want another reason to hate the way AI companies are operating right now and the way the technology is kind of being abused or, exploited or utilized in ways that are not beneficial more often than not. There's some beneficial uses that I've seen, but generally this AI race has been so fueled by greed. And those are the elements that are worth despising and worth calling out. And we're seeing its effects now on highly anticipated upcoming hardware like the Steam Machine, and it'll affect other beloved aspects of consumer electronics as well in the not so distant future. So, just be prepared for that. But this is the latest on the Steam Machine. There's just not a whole lot to say on the part of Valve, except to say that we're still not sure about how we're going to proceed, but they're still making a lot of considerations behind the scenes. But I'd love to hear, in the meantime, what your thoughts and opinions are on when you think the Steam Machine will launch and how it'll be priced based on current market conditions for computer electronics, based on how SSDs and RAM and other computer components have shot up in price, and how tenable all of this is, and what you think Valve's move will ultimately be under these conditions to try to make Steam Machine as successful as possible and hopefully as financially accessible as possible. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.